Thank you to OFE for the opportunity to speak today, because 2026 is really a very exciting year for European open source. And I have to say I'm even more excited after hearing from Fabrizia, from the Commission at the last panel, about community, about maintenance, and about the global connectedness of open source, because that's exactly what I want to talk about. So this new strategy is a great evolution from the old open source strategy of the Commission, which was more inward looking at the administration, and is more going into the direction of an open source industrial strategy. And this digital ecosystem strategy will take a more holistic view of open source as a driver of economic competitiveness, of cybersecurity, and of digital sovereignty. And it's, I think, thanks to the people in this room, the global open source community brought together by Open Forum Europe and the European Commission, led by Commissioner Virkkunen and her team, who have realized the strategic importance of open source. Europe does well to double down on this strength, because the EU is already a global open source powerhouse. At the moment, there are nearly 25 million EU developers and 1.3 million EU organizations on GitHub, working on 54 million EU-based software projects. And when it comes to contributions to open source, Europe doesn't just participate, we lead. In 2025, European developers made more than 155 million contributions to public software on GitHub, ahead of the United States and India. And the European public clearly cares deeply about the subject of open source, as we can see from the already over 1,000 contributions to the consultation from individuals, companies, and foundations. And I've looked at a few of those, and one theme that I've seen is the great appreciation for the Commission's past investments in open source and how much they have meant to people. These numbers really matter. They show us that open source is not a niche. It is the nervous system of our digital economy. It is the scaffolding beneath our services, the bedrock under our breakthroughs. Today, I want to make one central argument, that Europe, to succeed with the open digital ecosystem, must defend openness as a practice and not just proclaim it as a principle. That means three things. First, we need to support the global open source collaboration, because our ecosystem is European not by its borders, but by its values. Second, we need to invest in open source maintenance, because not everything valuable can or should be commercialized. And third, we need to think beyond industry silos, because the most strategic technologies are often foundational, cross-sector, and quietly everywhere. Let me turn to those in turn. First, supporting the global open source collaboration. Some people may ask, well, if we invest public money, should we invest only in European open source? And I think it's a fair question, but it can become a false choice. It assumes that you can neatly divide the open source world into European and not European. And I think we've heard great examples such as Drupal of why that is not the case. If the goal is to have more tech companies in Europe, that is of course a very important goal. There are promising measures to make that happen, such the EU Inc. initiative, the 28th regime, which I think should also apply to nonprofits and open source foundations who are facing the same difficulties with employing people across the EU. But when we talk about open source, software development is globally connected. In 2025 alone, EU-based public software projects on GitHub received millions of code contributions from abroad. The largest contributing countries were the US, the United Kingdom, and India. But together, these three countries make up less than half of the total global contributions to EU projects. That long tail is not a footnote. It is the feature which helps to make the code better and more secure. So, what makes open source European then? Not a passport, not a postcode, not a perimeter. What makes it European is that it is used in Europe, it is trusted by European industry and administrations, it is governed transparently, and most importantly, it is aligned with European values of openness, interoperability, and accountability. Because open source is not a fortress, it is a bridge. And a bridge works in both directions. Europe benefits from the world's contributions, and the world benefits from Europe's contributions. That is how Europe scales influence, not by closing the gates, but by raising the standards globally. Second, I want to talk about open source maintenance. We have long funded innovation, and we should, but we must also fund what keeps innovation alive, maintenance. Think of the digital world as a city. Research and innovation programs help to build new skyscrapers, but the city fails if we neglect the roads, the bridges, the water, and power. Open source maintenance is our digital roadwork, or I think Daniel described it as the plumbing. It is unseen, unglamorous, and utterly indispensable. We don't put a toll booth on every road and bridge to make it profitable. We pay engineers to maintain it so commerce can flow. That is why the strategy should treat open source maintenance like infrastructure investment, steady, strategic, and sustained. Not a one-off grant, not a pilot project that expires, not a contest that rewards novelty over necessity. A few years ago, Log4Shell taught the world that a few lines of code can trigger 1,000 headlines. That is not an argument for fear, it's an argument for care. The answer was not to commercialize Log4j. Instead, the German government's sovereign tech agency, the GitHub Secure Open Source Fund, public and private sector initiatives have stepped in to support the maintainers behind the project. For some open source projects, commercialization is realistic, it's healthy and even transformative. But for others, it is a category error. We must distinguish between open source products and open source components. Products like operating systems or applications can be monetized through services, through hosting or support contracts. Components, on the other hand, like programming languages and libraries, often cannot be monetized directly, yet they enable everything else, including Europe's most successful industries. So don't force every open source developer into a business suit, except, of course, if it's the Open Source Awards we celebrated last night. It's fun because it only happens once a year. If we require a commercialization plan from every project, we will exclude the very things our economy relies on. Because open source value is not captured at the point of sale. It is captured at the point of use, continuously, every day, by every company in every stack. It is captured in productivity, resilience, interoperability. It is captured when switching costs fall and competition rises. It is captured when lock-in loosens and choice expands. And let's be clear, Europe can still champion open source businesses. In fact, we should help European open source businesses grow globally, not to hide locally. But supporting business growth is not the same as forcing every project to become a business. We need an ecosystem where the commercial can thrive and the commons can survive, where companies can build on the commons and the commons can be cared for by more than goodwill alone. My third point is to think beyond just industry silos. There are some sectors like automotive which really show the promise of open source collaboration in a vertical. But if our policy lens is only which sector, we will miss what matters most, the foundational building blocks used by every sector. Consider the programming language Rust as an example, supported through strategic investment by Germany's sovereign tech agency. Rust is designed to prevent whole classes of memory-related errors, errors that can otherwise lead to crashes, to data loss, and to security vulnerabilities. A programming language like Rust is not automotive open source or health open source or fintech open source. It is secure by design, sector by sector, everywhere by everyone. The EU should absolutely support its verticals to collaborate on open source. The automotive sector is showing the success of this model in the area of connected cars. But if you support only the visible industries, you start starving the invisible foundations. And if you starve the foundations, every industry suffers. So let us avoid a policy that is vertical when our dependencies are horizontal, siloed when our software is shared. We need to invest in what is cross-cutting as well. Programming languages, libraries, tool chains, build systems, cryptography, packaging. We need to invest in the things that don't fit neatly into a single industrial box, but that hold all of the boxes together. So to conclude, if Europe builds an open digital ecosystem that supports global contribution, it will amplify Europe's influence. If Europe builds a strategy that funds maintenance as infrastructure, it will strengthen Europe's resilience. And if Europe builds a strategy that goes beyond industry silos, it will multiply Europe's competitiveness. A strategy that is open to the world, solid at the core, and smart across sectors. Thank you.